Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ask Me Anything. Today's topic is around something that has been on many minds. It's around rent and accommodation. We've got your questions that you submitted before from students of the University of Manchester. Today's session is hosted by me, your Students' Union Officer for the Faculty of Science and Engineering, Esa.
I'm the school representative for School of Natural Science.
And Elliot.
I'm the City and Community Officer at the Students' Union.
We ask your questions from Duncan, the President and Vice-Chancellor for the University of Manchester. Welcome, Duncan.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
So, let's get into it then. Esa, do you want to start the questions?
Yeah, so I think, Duncan, to kind of give a bit of background to the situation, I think a lot of students are really interested why rents are increasing in the coming years and why accommodation costs are so high at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we're not immune from what's happening in the broader economy more generally, but we're also trying to kind of mitigate some of the structural features. So we have, of course, inflation, we have rising construction costs, we have rising costs across the board that we need to grapple with. We also have the costs of construction, right? So we want to invest in new accommodation, and those costs have sort of skyrocketed. So all those structural features of the economy impact the university as well. So as you're seeing in the private market, so you're seeing in the more public sector market as well. Having said that, I guess the challenge is how do we balance those economic realities with the need to keep rents as affordable as possible? And that's the difficult balance we're trying to strike, and that's why rents are going up next year. But as we've tried to do it in ways that sort of recognize the need to keep things affordable and the need to keep investing as well. So that's essentially the situation we're in.
Yeah, makes sense. I think one of the questions that came through from a lot of students is, how is it possible that the university doesn't make a surplus from accommodation? And could you explain this a bit more in detail? Because I think a lot of students feel that rents are really high at the moment and they really value knowing where that money's going.
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, nobody wants their rent to go up, right? I mean, that goes without saying. I totally respect that, and the student community should be challenging us on every pound we spend on accommodation. So let me I don't want to sort of get definitional about this, but we don't make a profit off our accommodation. Any surplus that we make, that is any funds we get over and above the rent that students pay us and the rents we charge, is reinvested directly in the upkeep of the accommodation, the reinvestment in the accommodation, and the costs associated with providing things like res life and security and all the sort of associated features. So we don't make money from our accommodation provision and then take that money and put it into the sports facilities or put it into salary increases or put it somewhere else in the university. So in that sense, you know, as I see it, we kind of run our accommodation at cost. So the reason why rents are going up is because, as I said earlier, the costs of maintaining the accommodation, including the kind of capital costs and the operational costs, are increasing, as you're seeing in the broader economy. We also want to keep investing in our accommodation stock as well, and some of it's pretty poor, right? Some of it's just not good enough, which is why we need to build new accommodation. So anything we make over and above the literal rent that you pay for your student accommodation goes right back into the accommodation provision. That's what I mean that's what we mean when we say we run it at cost. There's no profit being made, basically.
Yeah, I think it's good for students to know actually that the surplus that the university is making from accommodations is going back into improving accommodation.
Yeah, the other thing to note, and you know, I sometimes, not just students but colleagues sometimes don't realize, there's no government funding for residential accommodation whatsoever. So we don't get any additional capital funding, for example, to provide student accommodation. And unlike the private providers of student accommodation in the city, they don't provide res life, they don't provide the additional services that we provide, the support that we provide. Of course, we can always do that better. We're always looking to improve it. But that's another element of our costs that also goes up like everything else. So like I said, we're trying to strike a balance between that and keeping things as affordable as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. I think a question that's kind of come through regarding a kind of regulation and policy brought in by students is, students want to know, will the rent in the new developments coming in Fallowfield meet the NUS affordability criteria?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. Here probably we could have a good debate or argument about this. I mean, I think, and Elliot will correct me, the NUS requirement is that rents be no greater than 50% of the student maintenance loan. Maximum, yeah. That's really, really hard to deliver for new accommodation that we have to build. We're going to struggle to meet that. Right now, about 27% of our accommodation meets that NUS criteria or threshold. And I think that's better than a lot of institutions of our size and scale and being in the city where we are. But that's obviously really difficult. So we will do our very best. And of course, the thing that really should happen here is the maintenance loan and needs to go up. There also needs to be maintenance grants. So if we can increase the maintenance grant and loan, then obviously that creates a better situation for everybody. And I think, we're certainly committed to arguing for that, and we'll continue to do so. But that's going to be a challenge for the future. Can we deliver new accommodation in a way that provides a range of different accommodation to our student community? Because there's no one single student, right? Every student has a different preference, or different cohorts of students have different preferences, but in ways that are as affordable as possible. And I think it's a genuine challenge that we need to work together on, because the cost of building just goes up and up and up. We don't have piles of cash that we can put into building new accommodation on our own. We have to work with a partner to deliver future accommodation. And the challenge we've got is for our partners to actually make it worthwhile for them to invest, they've got to expect a certain return. And this is where the public and private sort of partnership becomes, kind of edgy, and we have to really work it through as we're trying to do. So, I really hope we can deliver as much accommodation as we can that meets that threshold, but it's really hard, given how demanding that threshold is. Which fair enough. That's the student position. I totally get it, but it's going to be a challenge.
If it's okay, just because the affordability metrics come up, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about what that actually means. So yeah, as you said, 50% the maximum maintenance loan is what is considered affordable by the NUS. That works out for the 2025-26 academic year, the coming year, over a 52-week year. That would be £101 per week for an accommodation to be considered affordable. There is no university accommodation that actually matches that. Typically, when the university has previously claimed accommodations are affordable, that is based on a 41-week contract, with the idea being that the maintenance loan will only cover accommodation within 41 weeks, leaving students 11 weeks out of a year where there's no money for accommodation, and that would be at an affordable rate of £124 per week. As the question was, will the new development be within the NUS affordability metric? Given a previous open meeting, it was mentioned that the rents will be roughly £235 per week when they open. That's over double the affordable £101 per week metric. That is worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I mean, like I said, I agree. We do have a challenge on our hands. I mean, I don't want to get into the minutiae. I mean, obviously some students don't stick around for 52 weeks and they have other arrangements or go home or work or whatever. So I think, we can argue about the specifics. But look, I think the premise of your challenge is correct. How do we deliver a range of accommodation that includes rents that fall within or as close to that NUS threshold? Like I said, that NUS threshold is pretty challenging. I don't know too many universities that can deliver it. That's not a reason not for us to aspire to that. So, and don't forget, we're building new accommodation, but there'll still be other existing accommodation that will sit alongside that. And as we've tried to do this time, the rent increases for next year range from 1% and upwards, and we've tried to minimize the rent increases for the older accommodation that is less less Gucci, if I could put it that way, less elegant, and we need to make sure it's appropriate. And the same thing will be true in the future. I mean, the other thing we have to do is continue to invest in support for students, right? And you and I have spoken about this before. We're going to provide more accommodation bursaries, more than we've ever provided before, and we're going to provide more student support in general by lifting the thresholds that students qualify for student support. So that's 1,000 more students from next year, and I'm really committed to finding ways to keep growing that, because I think for me the dream is if you're qualified to come to the University of Manchester, finances should not be an obstacle, and accommodation is one of the biggest obstacles that I know students face. So in short, as I've said, there's no avoiding it. We're going to have a challenge to deliver as much affordable accommodation as we can in the new development, just because of the economics of building accommodation in Manchester, not just now, but 5-10 years hence. And we have to work on that, and at the same time we have to increase the support we provide to students through other means as well, including arguing for the return of maintenance grants and including increasing the maintenance loan. But yeah, look, it's going to be a real challenge.
Just on the strategy that you outlined of the university trying to keep costs in the currently lower priced accommodations low, at the expense of those higher ones going up even higher. Given that the university is currently planning on demolishing Oak House for cheapest over summer, and there has been a number of discussions that eventually Whitworth Park will get redeveloped. Is that strategy not going to result in a situation where suddenly the average rent price hikes up hugely once Whitworth
look, it's a good challenge, and I don't think we've made any final decisions about Whitworth, for example, and look, I don't want us to be in a situation where there is no affordable accommodation whatsoever. I mean, where we're not able to offer a wide range of affordable rents, and I think we just have to commit ourselves to making sure that doesn't happen. We certainly, in the way you put it, I sure hope it doesn't we don't just wake up one morning and say, oh bloody hell, we've got no rents below £300 a week. That would be a mistake. So that's exactly the work we have to do.
That's a very good point, because next question asked by students is around Oak House. So, we need to replace Oak House with another affordable accommodation after redeveloped. Do we have any plan for that?
So I think this is one of the questions that we're going to have to, grapple with over the coming few years, because we've committed to the new development. It's the largest student accommodation redevelopment in the country right now, and to be honest, the university probably should have been doing this earlier than we have. So I think we're catching up to where other universities, are now, and that's good that we're catching up. But it means that as we're doing it in a time where it's very expensive. So yes, we need to make sure we provide affordable housing. As close to that NUS threshold, as difficult as that threshold is to match given current circumstances, and that means thinking hard about the future of Whitworth, thinking hard about the future of the development we're committed to now, and where we need to ensure that students can get access to housing that is within that range. That's the challenge we've got.
Yeah, because Oak House was one of our sub £130 per week accommodations. Hopefully we can provide a replacement for that.
Look, whether we can provide a direct replacement, I think is the question we need to ponder. Right now, I'm not sure, really not sure. But I think it's right that you're pushing us to think about, what kind of accommodation can we provide for students that are at those lower rents, and we need to come up with an answer to that.
Next question is from our postgrad students. So postgrad accommodation on City campus, which is one of our 3 campuses, has greatly increased with no halls under £250 per week. Why did the university decide this? And they say even funded students are struggling pay that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm going to have to sort of take that on notice, because I agree that postgrad students often get sort of left out of the accommodation planning cycle, especially in universities with large numbers of undergrads such as we have. I mean, there will be, I'm pretty sure, postgraduate accommodation in the new development, and then the question is, will it be affordable? I mean, postgrads need similar access to student support that undergraduates have. We've just we'll be increasing our stipends from this year to match what's happening with UKRI. So we are investing in the support that postgrads get. But I think you're right. I think we need to think about the accommodation as well. And of course, we're increasing the number of postgraduate research students that we want to attract to the university, right? And one thing I'm very proud of is one of the biggest commitments we've made is through the bicentenary scholarship and fellowship scheme. That's potentially going to be 28 million pounds of new investment in postgraduate student support. So we need to make sure that those students have access to the accommodation that they need. And of course, they come with complex needs often. Sometimes they're with families, sometimes they're on their own, sometimes they're in partnerships. So we need to make sure we've got the range of accommodation that suits them as well. I mean, there is a not insignificant number of postgraduate accommodation now. The question is, can we maintain it at an affordable level? It's the same challenge we've got with undergrads.
Yeah, and those 52-week contracts also mostly for postgrad students.
Yes, that's where it might be slightly different with undergrads, isn't it? Because you're in a different scenario when you're a PhD student or an MPhil student or even a PGT student, right? You tend to be here for the full year, especially if you're an international student. Although sometimes international students go back as well. So I agree. That might be a nuanced difference between the postgraduate cohort and the undergraduate cohort, meaning the affordability challenge is even greater, right? So, yeah, it's a fair point.
And with that, I think we responded the next question, which was why PGRs are not considered in accommodation strategies. I think.
Yeah, look, I think it's a fair point. I think it's a fair criticism, and we need to address that.
Could I ask with I didn't catch the number that you said of the investment going into postgrad.
So the bicentennial studentships and fellowship program that we just announced, all up, if you look at it over the whole period, involves a commitment of up to £28 million. That's new postgraduate research student fellowships and postdoctoral fellowships, and they're distributed differently across the faculties depending on preferences. Now, we're also trying to raise funding from through our philanthropic campaign to match some of that funding. So the goal is hopefully we can also, and we're having some really good discussions, just had one last week with an amazing foundation that wants to support us in this space. So we're also looking to kind of match some of that funding through philanthropy. Now those are studentships, not just studentships and fellowships, but also a lot of mentoring and support for their research activities. And obviously, as I said, we're also seeing stipends appropriately rising to meet the increased cost of living for postgraduate students as well. So yes, we need to make sure we're building and providing access to affordable accommodation, but we are also investing on the kind of support side as well, at a time when I don't know any other university that has announced that scale of investment in our early career younger colleagues. I'm very proud that we're able to do that, and that was a decision that the university executive took very, very carefully, and understanding that we could afford it and it was something that we could commit to. So yeah, there's challenges on the accommodation side, but we are also investing on the support side in really significant ways.
But none of that money will go towards like subsidising accommodation or anything like that?
Well, that funding is going directly towards PGR students and postdocs. So it's their stipends and fellowships and research support. Obviously, that's funding that they will put towards their cost of living. But you're right. We need to be thinking about, what it comes down to, and this is the tough question and the balancing act we've got is, how much are we able to invest to subsidize the accommodation costs of our students compared to other things we need to invest in and support. So yeah, that's the fundamental balance or question we have to ask. And people are going to disagree about where we put the emphasis.
It's also interesting. For example, we have PGT-specific accommodations and UG-specific accommodations, but we don't have any PGR-specific accommodations.
Is that right? So we don't have any, genuine question, so we don't have a kind of dedicated PGR?
So when you're choosing your accommodation, you can specify your UG or PG. So if you are PGT or PGR,
there's no distinction between that. Yeah, look, that's a fair point. I'll take that on notice. It's interesting. When I was an international student in the UK, there was dedicated PGR housing. I didn't get in, so I didn't live there, but there was dedicated PGR housing. And certainly where I was before I came to Manchester, there was some, but not a lot. I think it's a bit of a gap.
Yeah,
probably.
Because they have unique challenges.
Yeah,
they need more focus.
Yeah, you're right. And like I said, they also often come in complex sort of packages, don't they? Kids and partners and things. So I think it's a fair comment. I think it's a fair criticism.
Exactly. And I think at the moment we only have one accommodation that students can be with their families.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Look, let me take it on notice. It's a good point.
Sure.
Yeah. Talking of kind of like gaps in support, the next question kind of comes from undergraduate students in particular, I think. Where they want to ask how the university supports low-income students who don't receive parental support but also don't qualify for the bursaries and scholarships. Because I think there's an area of students who their parental incomes are high enough that they don't qualify for the bursaries and scholarships, but they're either estranged or they struggle to receive funding from their parents, and there's kind of a gap there that kind of exists for students in terms of they might not qualify for the support, but they also kind of can't afford it themselves either.
Yeah, look, it's a good question. As I said earlier, the other big decision we've made, again, working closely with the Students' Union, with Elliot, Nahid and others, is to increase the threshold at which students qualify for university bursaries, and also increase the bursaries themselves. Now that's going to be an additional £2.5 to £3 million of funding that will flow from next year. And when you look at those thresholds, they are starting, I think, to capture, a lot of our students who are coming from families who might on paper look like they've got, a reasonable sort of family income, but in practice it's a real struggle. So that's 1,000 more students from next year and every year subsequently that will qualify for student support of one kind or another. And we want to really increase that. That's going to be a big priority in our philanthropic campaign. It's a big priority in our sort of government relations work. So we really, I think the solution to that problem is to keep trying to find ways to increase the threshold at which bursaries kick in, and to make sure the bursaries are, as far as we can, tracking inflation. And that, I'm really committed to trying to do that. That this isn't just a one-off, that we're trying to increase it, on a regular basis. The accommodation bursaries, Elliot will argue that this is just going straight to the landlords and, whoopee for them. But, that's new, and we've committed to 200 accommodation bursaries from next year. Again, we have to balance that against students who are not in our university-owned accommodation and who are renting in the private sector. And students have been saying they should qualify for them as well in the private sector. I think, that's an interesting concept. So I think I think you're right. I think students who fall just below that threshold, or who are, not able to get additional help from their families, it's a broader cultural problem, right? More generally, is something we need to be alert to. And I think we're on our way. I'm really pleased that the Student Union and the university executive were able to agree on that threshold increase, and that's something we want to continue to grow if we can.
Yeah. Do you think more than just like the threshold increase, there would be the university would be open to kind of like changing the eligibility requirements to be more comprehensive, like to look kind of more individually at students? Because obviously there's still, even if you increase the threshold, there still might be students who still fall not within that threshold but still cannot afford it. There's obviously a large variety of reasons.
There is. And this is something that UK and Australian universities have not been as good at as I think some North American universities have been, which is this idea of needs blind student support, where essentially you know if you're good enough to get into the University of Manchester, then we basically figure out the financial support you need, right? And there is an ultimate threshold beyond which we don't provide any support. But as you put it, there's a kind of comprehensive approach. We're just not there yet. We don't have, I think and I will be corrected if I'm wrong, I think we spend somewhere between 12 and 15 million pounds a year on one form of student support or another, and that doesn't include some indirect things that we do. But we would really need to see that number increase significantly to provide that comprehensive support, where every student who comes in a sense, we look at them and say, if you're below this threshold, then here are all these things that we can do to help you financially. So that's the dream, that we have a kind of needs blind approach. Doesn't matter what your background is, if you're good enough to get in, we support you. And then we adjust according to your sort of family income as a result, as many of the really leading North American universities are able to do. That's the dream, but we're not there yet. But I do think, as I said, I think we're now on this road where we're going to be looking at those thresholds and asking ourselves, can we make them more inclusive? Can we increase that threshold? Can we increase the bursary? So we're on our way, at least in that sense.
That would be good to see from the university in the future.
Mm.
Talking of kind of like students with additional needs and access needs, I think this next question comes from students who have particular access needs in terms of accommodation. So they've asked whether there'll be accessible rooms in the new Fallowfield redevelopments, and if so, do you know off the top of your head how many accessible rooms there'll be in the new developments coming?
Yeah, so there will be, absolutely. And there's two things to say about that. So one thing is we've assessed the number of specific kinds of accessible rooms that we think we'll need, and they will be provided. We think we can more than meet the very specific needs that disabled students might have. So we're confident about that. Secondly, though, I mean, the new development will be built on a sort of principles of universal design, which means there'll be lifts on every floor. The width of the doors and the corridors will be wheelchair accessible and disabled accessible, and also rooms are going to be designed in such a way that they can be adapted very easily. So we're actually building in disabled access to the extent we can right from the get-go, so we don't have to reverse engineer or do really, I think, often problematic things, sort of workarounds and stuff. So we'll be able to meet, we think, the existing and likely future demand for very specific needs that disabled students might have, but also the design of the rooms, the corridors, the toilets, making sure we've got lifts and people aren't going in back doors and all that stuff. That's going to be designed in from the very beginning, and that's been an important part of the commissioning of our sort of partners and the design of the whole site. So that's, I think that. So I'm confident that we're going to meet those requirements.
Yeah, it's good to see that the university is kind of bringing in like a wide kind of access approach.
Yeah, look, it's hard. I have to say, in the last few months, I've met with the Disabled Students Network, the Disabled Staff Network, the Neurodiverse Staff Network, and the stories they tell me are pretty bad. Like, there's some basic things we need to keep doing as a university. Some of it has to do with the legacy issues in some of our buildings, but even some of our newest buildings were not, I think, designed with the perspective of a disabled colleague in mind. And I don't want that to happen with our new student accommodation, and I'm pretty confident that it won't.
Yeah, that was really good to hear.
Just to give a number to the question, my understanding is it's 21, or is it 26?
26, I think.
Sorry,
and we're confident that is the actual demand. It more than meets the demand that we've got now. But as I said, we're very confident that we can either flex or that the new provision will meet the requirements. But as I said, the good thing is that building this in from first principles means we can adapt much more easily than we can with our existing accommodation, and that's really important.
And have these decisions around the number of the number of accessible rooms and the ability to get adaptations put in place, do those exceed legal requirements of the university?
I'm almost certain they do, but I'm happy to be corrected, but I'm almost certain they do.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the next question kind of comes off, I think there was kind of a plan, I believe, to have all first-year accommodations based in the Fallowfield campus. So I think some students wanted to know like where all the first-year accommodations will be located in the future and what the expected rent prices will be for them.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I mean, I think the goal is to have all the first-year accommodation in the one site, and as we were speaking about earlier, the expected rents will vary because first-year students, as we know from what happens on open days and whatnot, they often have different preferences. Like I said, our student accommodation preferences are quite diverse. Some students want to have a very kind of ensuite solo room, whatever. Others want to be in a less kind of expensive environment and have, basically a concrete block. And that's all there is to it. So it's going to vary, but what the exact rents are, we'll have to see.
Do you think if you're putting all like first years in the Fallowfield campus, for example, do you think that jeopardizes the needs of first years who want to be closer to university, who want to not have to get the bus to university?
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, I don't quite know the answer. I mean, I would be surprised, but I will be corrected, no doubt. I'd be surprised if we would force all first year students to live in one place. I mean, I think the goal would be to say this is where all the first years are going to live generally, but you can nominate other, choices as well. Because, as I said, if I'm consistent, first years will have different preferences, and some will want to be at Fallowfield and they want to have that experience, and you're right, others might want to be much closer to campus. So I'd be surprised if we said you can only live in Fallowfield if you're a first year student, but yeah, let me take that on notice. I don't think I can't believe we'd do that, but maybe there are other reasons why we might do that too that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Do you know of the reasoning if we want to prioritize the first years to be allocated in one building together? What's the reasoning behind it?
I think the best. First year is one of those really important transitional years, right? Where you're coming, whether you've come from school or the workforce, or whether you're coming back to uni for after a gap year or whatever. It's one of those really crucial transition years where, a big university like Manchester, the risk is you can feel a bit lost and alienated and a bit alone and not really know what to do or where to be and be trying to figure things out, not only at uni but in your own life. And I think the rationale is, let's create the opportunity for people to get to know each other, build that sense of belonging, build connections across your cohort. And these are going to be people that you move through if not your course through, you're going to move through your university time together. I mean, I might be kind of pathetic, but I'm still really close friends with the first person I sat beside in my first lecture on my first day at uni. And it turned out that she and I were in the same classes over the course of the semester. And then we lived in the same sort of residential complex, right? So it's to build those connections and networks that help you get a sense of belonging and kind of orient yourself. But, like I said, students are adults. They will make choices about where they want to live and who they want to hang out with and associate with. But wherever we can create those connections and that sense of belonging, I think it's more likely that their experience is going to be a more positive one. So I think that's the rationale for wanting to bring all the first years into a single. We couldn't put them all in one building. We don't have a building big enough, but we at least put them in the same neighborhood. Yeah.
I mean, the uni certainly tried during COVID to keep all the students to the Fallowfield campus when the fencing went up.
Yeah, I wasn't here, so no comment on that.
Do you believe the rent prices are justified by the quality of our accommodations?
So we've tried to set our rents according to the quality of provision we're providing. So the cheapest rents are for accommodation that's the most basic. and the more expensive rents are for the accommodation that is, has maybe a higher quality or has more options built into it. So I think roughly yes, but judging by the emails I get from students and some of their parents, I know that some of our cheaper accommodation leaves a lot to be desired in terms of the quality. And, we always have to make sure students are safe and are, not dealing with unhygienic and unsafe living environments. So we need to jump on those right away. But roughly, I'd say yes.
Good.
Not ideally, but roughly.
Could I ask how much your rent you're paying is?
Right now, it is £1,800 a month.
And do you feel that that's justified for what you're getting from?
I don't know. I mean, like, when I look so where we're living, that's kind of a standard rent, I think, from what I can tell. It's hard for me to know. I mean, it's less than the rent we'd pay for, something similar in other cities I've lived in, and a bit more than what we've paid in cities we've lived in before. So it's not outrageous, but yeah, hard for me to know.
And what percentage of your take-home pay would that rent price be?
Off the top of my head, I mean, it sort of falls within the kind of, I don't know, what's the sort of rule of thumb? 30 to 40. It shouldn't be more than 30 or 40% of your. So it falls within that.
Fits within the NUS definition.
Touche. Yeah, touche. Yeah. Look, I'm fortunate. We're very fortunate. We can afford to pay our rent and live a good life in Manchester. So we're very fortunate.
I guess a question coming on about, like, we talked earlier about the profits and surplus that the accommodations make and how that all goes back into accommodation. I think a question that I've had from some of my reps in School of Natural Science is, why can't the university use profits or surplus from other areas to kind of make rent costs cheaper?
Yeah.
Why can't they kind of like bring in surplus that you make from tuition fees and things to make rent costs cheaper?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, but this is exactly the balance we're trying to strike. So as I said, we are doing all we can to reinvest in our accommodation and to keep our rents as affordable as we can, given the costs that we face. At the same time, we are trying to balance this against other costs that we have across the university. So, just to put something into context, if you look at the gap between, for example, the funding we get to support the research we do and the actual cost of the research, that gap as a country is over £5.5 billion. So we're having to find enormous amounts of resources to ensure that we can keep supporting the research that we do. That's a really important thing for us, really important priority for our university. We also, the gap in terms of the funding we get for the teaching we do across all our different subjects, again, that gap is about £1.5 billion across the country. So similarly, we're having to balance how we ensure that we can support the kind of teaching we do, because some teaching we do is relatively straightforward and doesn't have a lot of overhead. Other teaching we do is incredibly expensive, and rightfully so. If you're training clinicians and future surgeons and whatnot, then you would expect those costs to be quite high. So we're faced, this is kind of the job of a university executive, is you're faced with trying to get the balance right between the different kinds of cross-subsidy that are required to run a university. I mean, I see a university as a kind of complex kind of ecology with lots of overlapping dependencies and cross flows, and you're trying to get the balance right between all of them so that the institution can really flourish. So yes, we do need to find ways to cross-subsidize our students so they can afford to live in Manchester and pursue their studies in a reasonable way, and we're trying to do that not only through investing in accommodation, and we are putting significant funds into the future accommodation planning, but also through the student support we provide and the bursaries and all that stuff. We're having to do the same thing with our research and our teaching as well. It's all about balancing the different forms of essentially cross subsidy that you've got to make. The only way we can do that is by ensuring that we remain a really popular and desirable place for people to come and study, that we attract great researchers and the funding that they can generate for their work, that people believe in us and want to support us through philanthropy, and that we're running the institution as efficiently and as well as we possibly can. And it's getting all those things stacked up that is the challenge for us in an environment where the higher education sector has been starved of funding for quite some time, and that has a kind of cumulative effect. So that's the challenge we've got. So it's not that we don't want to invest more in accommodation. It's what's the right balance between students who are living in accommodation, those who aren't, between what we would invest in student accommodation versus what we would invest in other parts of the institution, and how do we kind of balance all that out?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you can argue, everyone has an argument about wanting, like if we had a bunch of researchers in here, they'd be saying, not enough, Duncan, you've got to put more into research. And similarly, colleagues in teaching and learning say not enough has been invested in our teaching and learning infrastructure. And that's fair enough. That's exactly the debate and conversation we have to have. I completely respect it. But then our job is to try and get that balance, right.
Do you think that by increasing costs of accommodation, it might actually kind of deter students from coming to this university and then kind of have an indirect negative effect
Yes,
as well?
yeah, I think that's a genuine risk. And, I think, as I said, I am concerned also that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years' time, we have accommodation that is beyond the means of too many of our students. And that's something we really have to be really clear-eyed about and be thinking about and be planning for. It doesn't make the challenges go away, right? It's very difficult. It's a real challenge to deliver affordable accommodation given the current costs involved. But that doesn't mean we don't have to try and get to grips with it. But that's a genuine risk that I'd like to make sure we take seriously and we avoid to the extent we can.
Yeah. Do you think even just in coming years, like next year, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, that the demographic of students coming to the university is going to change as you increase costs? You kind of change the type of students that are able to come to the university and kind of...
Yeah, no, I hope not. I mean, right now about 25% of our students come from some kind of disadvantaged background. However, there's lots of ways of defining that. And, if I look across the Russell Group, we're in the sort of toppish tier, if I can put it that way. So for an elite university like ours, not elitist, but elite university like ours, that's not bad, but I'd like it to be better, and about not enough students from poorer backgrounds are going into higher education in general, although the UK as a whole has been doing pretty well if you look at the kind of aggregate data, but it's sort of stalled a bit in the last few years. And I think that is partly to do with cost of living. I think it's got partly to do with a lot of noise about higher education. We had previous governments saying don't bother with university degrees, even though all of them went to Stanford, Oxford and Cambridge. I think that's a bit cheeky, right? Or disingenuous, frankly.
And they went for free.
Yeah, free, quote unquote. So I don't see any indication yet that we're seeing a decline in that number of students who we currently attract coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. But of course we want to see that proportion grow, and it is something we have to be really conscious of. And as I said, the dream for me is we move to this kind of needs blind system where if you're qualified to come, we figure out the funding after that, rather than that being something that a student goes, ooh, I'd like to go to Manchester but can't afford it, so I'm not. But that's going to require us to build up the resources to do it. I mean, like I said, we're sort of starting down that path, but we've got more to do. But that's a genuine risk that I really don't want us to ignore.
Yeah.
I've got some questions from the campaign group Fight Rent Hike.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first ones is, has the university made any financial investment itself into the Fallowfield redevelopment? If so, how much, or is the entire project being financed by Viridis?
So we have had to put some funding towards the development because there are things we have to do to sort of get the site ready, and so that involves us putting funding forward. And I'm very happy to confirm what that is. I think it's in the vicinity of over the life of the next few years, in the vicinity of 40 or 50 million pounds. But let me, I'm happy to confirm that. But otherwise, when you're doing these large projects, essentially you're working with both a construction partner and then the finance partners who will invest in it, and that will be a whole bunch of different finance partners. None of that has been finalized yet. You have to go through a process, and we'll, in this kind of joint venture, we are likely to have a stake in that joint venture. That is to say, we'll have a kind of ownership component, but that's not to do with making money out of it. It's mainly to do with ensuring we have sufficient control and the ability to shape the project, because you don't just want to hand over the keys, as it were, to a third party and say, there you go. So there is a kind of complex set of arrangements there that will involve us investing, but we don't have the resources to build it at the scale that we need to, hence the reason why we go into a partnership.
And with that sort of level of control, will the university retain control over the rent prices, or will it be set by?
No. So I mean, the balancing act here is to ensure that the rent that we are charging enables the partners in the joint venture to get the return that they need in order to finance it and build it, and that to balance that against the rents that we feel are appropriate for our students. And that's something that you're in constant dialogue with each other around. So there are some assumptions built into the joint venture about what the partners need to justify their investment, but we can adjust from our side what we think is appropriate for the rents. Now, that can have consequences that mean there's less funding available for other things, but there is an ability to sort of adjust that.
And will the university be willing to enact some form of rent controls or rent stabilisations on the accommodation, limiting increases each year to the lowest of either maintenance loan increase or CPI?
Not at this stage, but that's something we have to, like I said earlier, I think how we, so I can't commit to CPI or below now, but as I said, I don't want us to be in a situation where we have no affordable accommodation whatsoever, and that, we're not able to offer a range of different forms of accommodation at different price points for our students. So that's what we have to work together on over this next period.
So you remember, I think it was the first Ask Me Anything episode?
Yes. Yeah.
Lexi asked you, how do you feel after a working day? And you said, ask me in 6 months. Do you want to...
How do I feel after a working day?
Yeah.
It's a combination of tired and inspired. There you go. There's a bumper sticker for you. Yeah, no, seriously, it's been a very intense first 7 months, but I've loved it. Doesn't mean that there aren't hard things that you feel you can't really figure out. But basically, after the end of the day, I usually feel a bit whacked, but usually feeling generally pretty positive too.
I mean, I have gotten one now. So when we, a couple months ago, we did an Oxford Road chat, and when we went down to Squirrels and had a drink.
Yeah. People did think that was a glass of gin, by the way. So I need to re-emphasize that it was water.
Well, I had loads of people asking me if you just absolutely out-drunk me, because I was still there just sipping my pint. Which, but at the end of that, I asked if you'd be willing to spend a week living in Whitworth accommodation. You said, I can't remember your exact wording, but you were sort of open to the idea, but didn't give
I think
a
week
commitment.
might be challenging, but happy to spend some time.
Would you be willing to spending some time this summer living in the Whitworth accommodation?
Look, let's. In principle, yes. In principle, yes. Yes, I would.
Okay, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Duncan,
No,
for
thanks. Good questions.
answering students' submitted questions. And thank you, Esa and Elliot, for your input as well.
Yeah, thanks, Esa.
We've got a series of podcasts coming up as part of our student open meetings with topics including student experience in our faculties, ethics of university investment, our faculties and estates, as well as our progress towards net zero. So please keep an eye on your email inbox, social media and SU communications to find out more about these podcast episodes. Thank you for listening. We'll be back soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks.